Good evening, everyone. I'm Isabella Panizza, Head of Global Digital Media at Enel Group, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to our 20th Enel Focus On. Due to the disruption that COVID-19 brings to our lives, we will enjoy another fully digital experience. Of course, you can interact with us via Twitter using the hashtag Enel Focus On. It's hard to foresee the future in front of us, but one thing is clear. We can't live our lives in the same way we did in the pre-COVID world. That's scary on one end, but it could mark a turning point. We need a deep change, a new way to think about our impact on our planet and on our communities. In order to do this, we have to migrate from an old energy paradigm based on fossil fuels to a new decarbonized one based on electrification from renewable sources. Of course, this is not enough. To rethink our society in terms of sustainability, we need to implement circularity in order to overcome current economic, environmental, and social challenges. For centuries, any relevant innovation has involved cities, and this time is no exception. That's why we are dedicating this NF Focus On to circular cities of the future. And this is why we invited today Martin Lopez Cardozo. He's a keynote speaker, and he is also the CEO at Circle Economy, a non-profit organization devoted to accelerating the transition to the circular economy. With him, we also welcome Joanna Rowell, Director of Integrated City Planning at Arup, an independent firm that is working across every aspect of today's built environment. We also have Gabe Klein. He's the co-founder at Citify and venture partner at Fontinalis, and is focused on significant application in mobility. I'm also very honored today to introduce you to Francesco Starace. He's the CEO and general manager of Enel. Mr. Starace started the renewable energy takeover of the energy industry back in 2008 as CEO of Enel Green Power. And he has been leading Enel Group since 2015 with incredible results, both on the financial side and on the sustainable development side, making Enel a global leader of the energy transition we are going through. So Enel Group started the conversation about circular cities back in 2018, and today we launched also our third edition of our position paper. So now I am very happy to leave the digital floor to Martin.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. And let me start with actually sharing two personal experiences. So when I was a little boy, I used to talk with trees. And when I biked from home to school, I can still vividly recall, the smell of the pine needles, the little squirrel running over the bike path, taking in that cold, fresh air. And I felt completely in harmony with nature. Now, 20 years later, I'm in Staten Island. I have my running shoes on, ready to run the New York Marathon. Over the bridge, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx. And what I recall from this first experience in the Big Apple was the excitement, the vibrance, the diversity, the energy in the city. And towards the finish, this lady who calls out to me, and she had a hard time pronouncing my name, Martigen, everybody is a winner. To me, combining these two experiences would be the ideal vision of a city, a vibrant, diverse, energetic city that is also completely in harmony with nature. A circular city that produces no waste, cycles the materials, and takes care of the air, the soil, the animals, basically gives back all the nutrients. It's also a smart city, but I think it's more than digital alone. I think it's a city where people live in an ecological safe, but also a socially just space. And if we want to build back better, I think this is a good place to start. So I'm with Circle Economy, and what we try to do is help nations, cities, and businesses make that transition to a circular economy. And we've worked with a lot of cities around the globe. But where do you start? How do you become a city? And how do you approach that in a post-COVID area? So I think we need to do three things. First of all, I think we should be very clear about our goal. What are we trying to achieve? And I think over the last decades, we've measured our success mostly in GDP. which is often translated in, building, gathering more things. But is that really the right metric? And do we need to couple prosperity to material goods that ultimately lead to the depletion of natural capital? So let's take an example from Santa Monica. They measure it differently. They actually measure it in the residents' well-being. And also, let's rethink ownership. Do we really need to own those things and stuff our houses, have cars, clothes, bicycles? Think about that. Can we reuse resources more efficiently? For instance, do you know that parking garages are only filled 10 to 20% of the time, and lots of cars are clogging all the streets? Second, I think we need to reintegrate with nature. As opposed to destroying nature, let's sort of be inspired by it. In China, for instance, they're now building these sponge cities. So what are these sponge cities? They basically have permeable roads, green roofs, wetlands, natural vegetation, and they absorb the water. So if you have a heavy downpour, they basically soak it up. So another example, in Basel, they cover a lot of the top of the roofs with green roofs. Not only does it help the rainwater and the flash floods, but also it avoids the heat in the city. And the last point is, I think we need to rebalance local and global. So I think global has brought us a lot of things, definitely economic growth, but I think with some real downside to the planet. And local economies have a lot they can do themselves. Food, water, shelter, mobility, and they're the ideal spaces to have local economies thrive. So think for instance, about food and what you can do with urban farms. And do you really need to drag fresh food in ships from across the world? And maybe we should make a little bit of difference. I think we're now in a digital space, which works perfectly global. So maybe those things should be global, whereas the physical world should be more local. So in summary, I think we have to rethink our cities. I think the circular economy, places where you have no waste, you cycle materials, and you basically take care of the natural habitants like soil, air, and water, is the way to go. And is this very visionary? Is it hard to change? Absolutely. But let's see what happened in the last 6 months with COVID. We have made tremendous inroads and have been able to change things overnight. Yes, it was painful, but also, yes, it did happen. Now, back to the little boy that used to talk to trees. And I have to admit, I still do. And by the way, they're great listeners. And I would urge you to also give it a try. And if you reconnect to nature, I think that's a really good start to think about the city of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was so inspiring. And as I said during the opening, Enel Group is pioneering the vision about circular cities. So I would like to ask to Francesco Starace how an energy company like Enel Group can have impact on this transition towards a circular city. Francesco.
Thank you, Martin. This was a very interesting introduction which you gave us. I will try now to speak to trees, see if they answer me. Martin already said this and that. So anyway, the reason why we get active in cities and in circular cities is that we find ourselves distributing energy in so many large industrial and metropolitan areas of the world, and in many rural parts of the world, and in many small size and medium-sized cities. And we see this diverse, incredible metropolitan universe evolving rapidly under our eyes. And being there, getting into the homes, into the offices, into the shops, and providing the last wire that gives energy to everyone, we find it natural to ask ourselves, what can we do to make the city more livable? What can we do to make life in cities less stressful, more friendly, in any case, closer to human beings? And there are so many things we come up with. And, today technology enables things that were unthinkable just a few years ago. in providing people with solutions, but also providing people with means to feedback if the solutions make sense or not. And this is the first circularity dimension which we think should be introduced in cities. Provide citizens of city the way to let those that administer the city, those that manage the cities, or companies that provide services to the city to understand what goes on and whether they're happy or not with what's going on, what ideas they have, how they could contribute to improve the life in cities. And the platform of communication with citizenships that we are preparing and we have prepared with NLX is one example that enables administrative bodies of cities and companies to interact easily with citizens and understand exactly whether what they do is right or there's something to be fixed about it. And if you look at it, there are so many dimensions of circularity which go far beyond what people think about when you talk about circularity. It's recycling waste. Of course, that's one point. But just getting feedback is another one, and rethinking many things that a city is all about is a third. So the spectrum of circular dimensions is so big that you could go on talking for hours, which is not the aim of this of this session. But if I give you two examples of circular cities that are maybe not evident to everybody. If you take Rome and you go to visit the classic touristic attractions of Rome, for example, you go into St. Peter's and you look at all the marbles that cover the temple over the church, you don't know that these marbles were taken off, recycled. They were taken off pagan temples all across the city and brought into St. Peter's to decorate the church. And you don't know that most of the columns in many Christian church today were actually columns that were sitting in fora or in pagan temples that were just taken off and recycled elsewhere. They didn't waste anything. By the way, it was very, very clever to recycle this stuff. Another example, if you take New York City, if you walk on the High Line, which is a fantastic walk across the ex-meatpacking district, and you find that this was an abandoned track of a train that was used to ship stuff out of the factories there, that for decades have been left abandoned and then found a new life, a circular solution, completely relaunching the real estate of a big part of New York City. So there are huge examples of circularity that apply not just to recycling waste. And we think it has to do with the fact that people in cities need to voice their ideas and their concerns and their needs in a more efficient way. So I think the most important part of the circular cities that I want to stress in this meeting is enable citizens to communicate what they think the city should be about in a more efficient way to many of the stakeholders that manage the city so that they understand what needs to be done and not just be criticized because they screw up. I think if that would happen, it would be a great spot. And then if you look to, for example, the city of Stockholm, the mayor of Stockholm has established this kind of channel with the citizens, and it works beautiful. She can have real-time daily feedbacks on what initiatives she has put forward and how people react to them in an interactive manner, and that will, I think, over the years create a lot of goodwill and give a lot of good ideas to development of cities going forward.
Okay, so I will ask to Joanna, who is closely involved on the topic of the evolution of cities with Arup. What's the role of an organization like Arup in this transition, and what are the conditions that make cities, in your opinion, more ready to evolve into a circular city today?
Thank you, and thanks for asking me to speak today. I think the first thing I'd like to comment on is that Arup has been really active across the circular economy agenda for a number of years, and we're working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're her knowledge partner and deeply committed to this topic, and delighted to be part of the research report that Enel have launched today on circular cities. And actually, I think for me, there are a few things I wanted to say about scale and understanding how we can implement circular thinking into the work that we do. And also, I thought I'd reflect slightly on the COVID-19 pandemic as well, because it's something we're living through and it certainly affected the way in which we're thinking about cities and city planning. So at the city scale, I really enjoyed what Francesco and Martin said about, livelihood and people and understanding what communities want from this new way of thinking. Really, it's about governance, I think, when we look at the circular economy, and we need to think about how we can forge really strong partnerships between both the public and private sector. The report they launched today talks about transparent and participative partners, which I think is going to be fundamental to the way we can really embed circular economy principles and projects into the planning and better design, the regenerative design of cities. So I think if I think about the work that Arup do around the circular economy at big scale, city thinking needs to be really strongly linked between governance, partnerships. But then, as Francesco said, I think that we can't forget that circular economy is about sustainability. It's about the environment, as Martin said, regarding looking after our habitats, wildlife, trees, people. But I think also we need to make sure we remember the circular economy is about social equity and ensuring that we can provide solutions that are really strongly linked between sustainability, governance, and social equity. I think as we move out of the pandemic, we're going to see more people concerned about health and well-being. And again, the circular economy really chimes with the fact that the planning and design of cities need to think really strongly about people, place, environment, and the circular nature of what we can do in terms of regenerative design, reuse, construction, transportation, energy, greening our landscapes. So I think for me, the debate about circular economy is really important at the moment. As city planners and city designers, I think we have to take into account the scarcity of resource and find innovative solutions about how we can embed the circular economy process into the way that we live, work and move. And I think to reflect on that a little bit more and maybe give a slightly more tangible example, we need to think in the short term about COVID recovery and what we can do to help cities come back to their full strength, which is going to include some pretty long-term practical measures. But when we think about the circular economy in the context of short and long term, I think the comments made so far about digital technology and innovation is fundamental to circular economy. But I'd say more than that, we need to be smart with data. And I think we are so data rich as a world now that there are some really interesting things that we can be doing around, as just Martin said, I liked your comment, global is digital and local is physical. And I'd say that absolutely leaning on innovation and technology and digital and data to start to think about how we can facilitate better understanding of the circular economy and ensure that we don't put pressure on supply chains, consumption and construction is absolutely the way to move forward. I was asked to think a bit as well about, how we can see the circular economy move the world from this current pandemic. Well, not move the world, but reflect on the current pandemic. And I think actually, just looking at the consumption patterns that are changing as a result of the pandemic and the way in which we're using resources, whether it's food, energy systems, our cities, is going to be a really interesting time for this debate. And I think the final thing I want to say that I'm really passionate about when we talk about the circular economy is it's absolutely about sustainability and in the environment. But as I said sort of earlier on, we've got to think about social equity and the outcomes that a circular economy can deliver. And the outcomes that a circular economy can deliver are about enabling employment, improving social cohesion, looking at less complex supply chains and systems thinking. So I'm not going to dwell on the point too much, but I think the circular economy for me is in terms of city design is about making sure that we get all the ingredients right and deliver better outcomes as we progress through a complicated time.
Thank you, Joanna. That was very, very interesting. So, Gabe, when we talk about cities, we tend to think about traffic jams, especially in Rome, where I live. Of course, we have St. Peter, but also a lot of traffic, and you know, you always think that cities are really not made for cars. Since we have today you, I would like to ask you, what do you think about the future of mobility inside the cities of the future? And also, will we electrify cars or we will abandon them?
A great question. Thank you so much for having me here today with this esteemed group. Like Martin, I grew up talking to the trees. I grew up on 18 acres without plumbing. And so I spent the first part of my life in a very, very rural place. And then I've spent the majority of my life in very busy cities. And I don't think that one obviates the other. So when it comes to transportation, though, and mobility, in the US at least, we tend to think, what can we do to preserve 80% of our lifestyle now, what we do now? And that would be the personally owned electric vehicle. And even there, we have challenges here with the uptake or adoption of personally owned electric vehicles. That's changing. But the vehicle, the envelope, the propulsion system, that's one component. But if we all go out and buy today's version of the electric car, we'll see but a modest improvement in emissions when considering all the impacts, the production impacts, the sourcing impacts of all of the components of a large 6,000-pound vehicle. So in some sense, the reversal of the notion, this is really part two, the reversal of the notion that we need to own and make a capital investment in transportation is really crucial to going circular. I spent the early part of my career with a company called Zipcar, getting 20 people to share a car for every owned vehicle, and it was very challenging. The culture and economics of consumption are such that people are incentivized to buy vehicles. So, in the future, we need shared mobility, whether it's scooters, bikes, cars, buses, trains, all of those are shared. And we need modular design. We need like kit of parts vehicles with 50-year life cycles versus, 5 to 10-year life cycles. And that includes batteries. Even more broadly, the way that some of us live needs to change. My feeling is that rural places and urban places will continue to thrive. They're both needed, but the suburbs are going to have to change. They're an invention of the 20th century, and they're going to have to rapidly urbanize to reinvent themselves to be sustainable in this new paradigm. Because the circular economy metrics that Martin and people like him are coming up with, or the happiness index, all of these great matrices will not support or justify the economics of the suburbs. Additionally, within cities, the street designs, this is really part three, will need to be radically different to support the mobility of the future. And the mobility of the future in a denser city is walking and biking. And those can be electric vehicles, but they're going to be more active mobility services. And I think that will be for the majority of trips. When you take a bike and make it electric, you go from 1 to 2 miles to 8 to 10 miles possibility, right? So we're going to see a lot of lightweight electric vehicles, whether they be e-bikes, cargo bikes, quadricycles. And also, as Martin said, we need green streets. We built in Chicago, when I was the commissioner, we built the Pilsen streetscape, or also known as the Blue Island streetscape. It was named the greenest street in the United States. And we actually used Italian pavers, by the way. We brought pavers from Italy that actually ate smog. The technology is not just the internet. The technology in the infrastructure can be amazing. We also repaved Michigan Avenue, which is our biggest, most well-known street in Chicago. we used, I think, about 80% recycled rubber and such from roofs. So in both those cases, we saved significant amounts of money on those projects versus doing it the traditional way. Now, part 4, I would say, is from a behavioral standpoint for people, we need to remove the friction for people to live a virtuous circular life. And this really means incentivizing denser living, shared mobility, multimodality, and then on the other side of the coin, significantly taxing and disincentivizing irresponsible building patterns, single occupancy vehicle use, and fossil fuel consumption, which in the US, we are not really doing that. Carbon taxes are important, but on their own, they're not going to solve our problem. But as part of a holistic program, could be impactful. For instance, if during the times when fuel is very high in cost, if we peg the cost of fuel at that price, and as it falls to where it is now, we take advantage of that delta, and we take that delta and invest it to fund sustainable infrastructure, public-private partnerships, consumer nudging. It can be hugely effective, basically like a Robin Hood strategy, right? And then finally, I would say there's the people aspect. And in many ways, this is the ultimate test for humanity. We need international, which is why I love this panel. We need international, national standards, and then we need context-sensitive local solutions to fit into. So much of the innovation will bubble up from communities and small companies that will work with folks like Enel. And so the goal of government, I think, will be to break down silos within their government, set broad outcomes and metrics, provide some tools, but then let local communities also figure out what tactics and resources they will use to meet those metrics, those KPIs. And then just in closing, to also comment on COVID, this is a terrible pandemic. I know you guys in Italy experienced it extremely harshly. We are as well. UK is as well. But we do need to use this moment to build back better, more sustainable, equitable, with people, nature, and health at the center. And the economics need to be baked in, but they will also follow, versus the opposite, where we just focus on GDP. And I think in Europe, you guys have it right with the embracing of the happiness index, which has GDP as a component. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. Thank you.
I think we also have an interesting question coming from Twitter, and I think is Jennifer Williams from the US, and she's asking if you could give advice to young people today, how could they contribute to make their cities circular? What a great question. I think, Martin, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's indeed a great question, and I would start off by saying, of course, and I think that has been the case for all generations, but maybe even more so than now, is the youth will define the future, and I think what has changed to some extent is that I think they are gathering quite a big voice on a lot of levels, and are really part of the debate. So if I compare, maybe not the little boy was talking to trees. Well, in that case, nobody listened. But even when I grew up a little bit, very few people listened to me. Whereas I think now with the social media and, just the fact that we're having this question from somebody on this panel, I think talks to what the influence is. And I think there's a few things you can do yourself, of course, and the way your own footprint and how you move and what you eat and those type of things. But I think increasingly so, I think you can be quite active and look for careers in that perspective, but also just be critical about what politicians are doing and be vocal about it. And my sense is, if I look at our own organization, we're 50 people, 25 nationalities, and these are all people that are entirely purpose-driven. I mean, this is their dream job. They want to make the world better. That's really number one. And if a whole new generation grows up like that, I think they will be a force for good. So I think here's some pointers, but I'd love to hear the other panelists weigh in on this as well, because I think it's a really good question.
Thank you so, Martin. Joanna, Gabe, would you like to comment on that or add something else?
I was only going to add a really short piece to that, which is in city planning, I think it's really important that we listen to the voices of many, which is where I was reflecting on social equity and understanding impact on both people, place and environment. So chiming with what you say, really, Martin, I think I might turn the question slightly and ask young people what they want from us to help them deliver the ambition that we have around circular cities. You know, we need to listen to the voices of young people because they are as concerned about the future of the planet as we are. But I totally agree with you. I mean, what can they do to start to improve the way they're moving and living in cities is all about, as Gabe was saying, you know, shared mobility. Look at the way in which they're consuming and moving around the city. So yeah, but I would say it's a great question, and they're our future, so we should listen to what they want to do. That was really utopian. Gabe, over to you.
Chime in and say the number one thing you can do is to vote. So please vote. Make your voice heard. You know, we need activists on the street. We need activist shareholders, and we need activist government officials. And the people like yourself that are young and coming out of school, I actually wrote a book called Startup City. And when I wrote it, I thought about people like you because I started in startups in the private sector, then moved to government and really tried to run government like a well-funded startup. And I think now we're seeing a lot of people go back and forth between private industry, NGO, philanthropy, and government. And I think that we need that. So, you know, I would say to you that you can be very impactful by learning in business, learning in government, and you can be entrepreneurial no matter where you are. You can be innovative and you can make change, but you have to establish vision and you have to work for people with vision. Like our CEO of Enel here, not everybody has that vision. And so look to work with great people before anything else. My question, it would be maybe for Martin, but you know, how do we sort of address the change management aspect? Because obviously there's economic development, environmental sustainability, social inclusion. I thought the report that Arab did, which I thumbed through, is excellent, by the way. But then how about the change management theory, the psychology, the sociology? If we're going to really embrace regenerative cities and a circular economy, it feels like the people part is the thing holding us back, the political part, right?
Yeah. No, I very much agree. And as an organization, actually, we have been talking about the concept of what we sort of call circular society. Because my sense is that if you do not include the social elements and you leave the people out, then transitioning to that vision will be very, very difficult. And I think if we talk to a lot of the city majors, yes, I mean, they like circular economy as sort of as a concept. It's also a very good sort of broad, inspiring theme to build your vision around. But ultimately, I think the two things that really matter to them are, of course, jobs, and ideally also jobs that are, decent jobs, right? So that's sort of what I call the fair and just and sort of equality piece. And in addition to that, I think the other one is the economic piece. And on that one, maybe I can sort of, before I became the CEO of Circle Economy, I was actually running a scale-up company called Black Bear, where we extracted high-quality materials out of end-of-life tires. And one of the lessons learned there is that, in the current model is quite economically driven. So you have to take care of the business model. And I think that's also a little bit where I think sometimes this sort of, when I would sort of go back to the Black Bear days where the rubber hits the road, where sometimes there is this vision, but the linear business models are still superior. So I think one of the political things you can do here is make sure that you incentivize and put the right, either taxes or incentives in place over a longer time period. So it really makes the business models work. And I think once you do that, then you basically unleash the powers of capitalism to make things work.
Thank you, Martin. I think Francesco is back. There was a briefly disconnection before.
Yeah,
We were all curious about SimCity. We wanted to
Yes.
hear more.
City is a funny game. You know, if you're a good mayor, people applaud you. If you're a bad mayor, they revolt against you. But you learn how, you learn how doing certain things for the benefit of your constituencies eventually pays out, and the city thrives and grows and becomes
Hmm.
a happy place. So if you let people play with it, one of my kids used to play the bad mayor, and his game was how fast he was thrown out of the office, by doing bad things. And there's many ways. The important things I think for children is to ask reasons, ask questions. Why things are this way? Can they be different? And that's why we're so interested in cities, because we believe that the world can be changed through cities. Cities have such an importance that it's not fully appreciated by states in which cities reside. Certain states go one direction or the other if their cities go one direction or the other, and not vice versa. So we think that a way of really influencing a sustainable world is to work on cities, because that's where the contradictions explode. That's where people suffer first. That's where problems become unsustainable first. So working on cities really is the best way to have a change into the rest of the world as sustainable, to change the rest of the world into a sustainable manner. The interest in cities lies in the fact that for us they are a huge lever with which to make change across the rest of the world. If you take many African countries, you ask yourself, why do people keep moving into cities when you look at the way in which they go living is unthinkable? Well, they go there because they have hope that going into a city, their life will improve. So you have to really work on that dimension if you want to change the rest of the society that gravitates around large metropolitan areas. And that's the reason why we have so obsessed in making cities a sustainable place, not just because we live in cities or we like that, but because we think that's the place to change, and that needs to change before the rest of the world changes. Whether we like it or not, we see that the population of the world is moving in these monstrous metropolitan areas, which, you can call them cities, but I don't know if the word is fully able to describe what they are. And this part of the world where 60% of the population will be by 2030 will be the part of the world which will decide whether we have a sustainable and equitable society or not. And we don't want to have a Blade Runner kind of city. I think we want to have a different kind of city.
Still
And this
this like
dystopian future is not something we want. So we need to really work hard at making the life of people in cities more aligned with what their view of sustainable life is. And that's the big efforts, and that's how we want to serve them. Clearly, because of the energy consumption of cities increases dramatically over time. It's amazing to see what a city sucks in terms of energy consumption every day. It's incredible. And in the meantime, people in cities, rightly so, don't want to see power plants, substation, wires, stuff. They want to see a nice place. And so you wonder, how can you cope with this trend of increasing consumption and the willingness not to see contraptions around you that cope with it? And clearly you wonder whether this consumption makes sense or it can be more efficient, and then the use of energy can be made in a different system. The whole efficiency of a life in cities is a big area of work. We have a workshop, a whole stream of work with the World Energy Forum, which we call systemic efficiency, that has majors of large cities working with us to try and find changes to the current energy consumption patterns of cities so that they are becoming flatter, more sustainable, more efficient, and in general more less intrusive on the environment of the city itself. Today, technology enables this, but not everyone is conscious of all the dimensions that need to be taken into account. And the city is the combination of complexity like no others in the world. It's one of the most incredible machines that mankind assembled. So to solve the riddle of a city means basically to make possible a sustainable life on planet Earth. Because it's the cities that destroy in this moment the system. What cities demand is unthinkable.
That is so true. It's so true. Thank you so much, Francesco. I'm so sorry that time is running out, and so we need to end our 20th Enel Focus On. But first of all, I really would like to thank you for, Martin, Joanna, Gabe, and Francesco for your insightful contribution to the discussion. As you said, and as we've seen, we're experiencing, of course, a huge crisis, which can also be our biggest opportunity to accelerate the change we need, as Gabe said. And this change is deep, and cities are for sure the place where we can test new solutions and approaches to implement circularity in our economies and communities. So the city of the future will be more than smart, it will be circular, but we must work hard to make clear and tangible to people the benefits of circular economy. And the fully circular economy can completely transform our quality of life, but what we need to do is a huge change of mindset from me to we. So I think that's all. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And of course, remember to follow and interact our Enel Group social media channels to keep alive the conversation. Thank you so much.